Spain is a really wonderful place to live. I've had a variety of friends who've lived there, and I've considered moving there at various times myself. However, the Socialist Prime Minister has recently announced a raft of aggressive new taxes, and so we're going to talk a little bit about what's coming, in particular to foreigners, and what that means for the rest of Europe. So let's dive in. Before we do, if you haven't already, hi, I'm Michael from Offshore Citizen. Welcome. We're some of the foremost international tax and relocation specialists in the world. And if you'd like help with optimizing your global tax, setting up international corporate structures, figuring out how to navigate the complex, legal, nuanced tax, all the complexities of international tax, then please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay, so headline is Spain is implementing, or at least has proposed to implement, 100% tax on property purchases on foreigners, okay? So the first question here is really, who does this affect? And the answer is non-EU residents. Okay, so for some context of what's going on in Spain, what is driving this is rising housing prices. Unsurprisingly, this is happening all over Europe, which is why I'm going to talk a bit about how this affects Europe, how it affects UK, how it affects Canada, a bunch of other different parts of the world, because this is a fairly broad problem that's getting a lot of attention, okay? But for some context, in 2024, 15%, I think it was the last quarter of 2024, 15% of all properties sold in Spain were sold to foreigners. The largest group of these were British, about 10% of that, but people from all over the place. So it is actually a pretty significant share of overall sales, and I would expect that it is going to hit that group pretty hard because, I mean, obviously, it's a major increase in the price of the homes, right? As I said, affordability being the big thing. The stats are apparently that housing has gone up by about 48% across Europe broadly, or across the EU broadly. Obviously, it's hard to average that by specific areas, but you kind of get this general idea. And that is over about the last 10 years, which is about double what people's wages have gone up over that same time. So in other words, you're in a situation where, at least in certain parts of the world, there is a real affordability crisis, which is really probably not that surprising to you because you're probably seeing it around you or hearing it. And if you're not, well, you're either in a lucky part of the world or you're not in a social class that is being affected by it. But it is a pretty big issue, and it's becoming a major social issue. So the Prime Minister has announced a whole series of different activities. One of them is this 100% foreign buyers tax. Another one is more aggressive taxes on people who are renting out properties for Airbnb, essentially proposing that they should be taxed essentially like hotels. And there's a variety of different other policies that go along with this, including in some cases some tax breaks for encouraging people to have affordable housing, some policies to try and build more housing. And it gives some idea of what the numbers look like, and the numbers are pretty off. It's similar in Canada, by the way. The estimates are that they need about 600,000 new houses by the end of 2025, and they're currently building about 90,000 houses a year. So this is a pretty long created problem, and it's likely to stick around for quite some time, but there are efforts to address it. Now, one of the interesting things to note is that actually is to some extent caused by the market, right? So we can talk about market intervention, and I'll talk about that in a second. But essentially, one of the big things that happened in the US, in Canada, and various parts of Europe, et cetera, is that during the global financial crisis, so some period of about 2008 to 2013, when house prices were hit quite badly, this resulted in a lot fewer houses being built. You can go and look at the stats in the US, it's pretty substantial, and also in Spain. Now, yes, there are also building permitting issues. There are issues with just how quickly you can build. There's zoning issues. There are all kinds of issues that have prevented supply from keeping up. And there's actually some really interesting economic theory you can look into that shows, because of the fact that real estate it lacks elastic supply, that you don't need to add that many people in order to have a really significant increase in the magnitude of housing prices. And so, of course, this is a huge issue. Now, one of the things that I've commented on is I think we're at this really interesting point, and you're seeing some things in Europe kind of echoing a bit of what's happening in the US, which is kind of echoing a bit of what happened in El Salvador and Argentina, right? So what happened there? El Salvador obviously kind of cleaned things up quite a bit, less focus on deregulation, et cetera, but a lot of focus more on markets, et cetera. Argentina with Milei, obviously aggressive cuts, increased poverty rates quite a bit actually initially, but has taken this stance of like, hey, listen, we need to clean up the excess bureaucracy, et cetera. He's kind of chainsawing across what's going on. And now we have Trump, and Trump won by a large margin, right? Well, around that, I've done a video on this before, we had the Mario Draghi report on EU competitiveness, which basically states that they're not competitive, surprise, surprise. The president of the EU has been pretty vocal about the fact that there needs to be changes, and there's a pretty large push from the business community across the EU. Simultaneous to this, the Labour government who got in UK has not been particularly popular, probably will be defeated the next election, and there seems to be this general move towards a more pro-business, anti-regulation group. Canada, you see similar. Justin Trudeau announced that he's basically going to be stepping down following the leadership race of the Liberal Party, and pretty likely the Conservative leader, Pierre, is likely to get in there. So we're likely to see this wave. However, I think what you're going to find is that at the core, none of these things are addressing the real underlying structural issues of wealth inequality. And this is probably going to be the major issue. It's kind of, I mentioned there's a few key trends that are affecting our world over the next decade, or well, probably like the next 1 to 4 decades, I don't know, 1 to 3 decades, something like that. And this is certainly one of them. Okay? Yeah, I think it's very hard to underestimate how significant this wealth inequality thing is going to be politically and the consequences that that has. So you probably get this kind of in the wake of Trump type action. You get actions that are probably good for business productivity growth, etc., although that isn't necessarily good for asset prices, which is a whole other thing. I'll maybe talk about that in a future video. But what you don't do is you don't really address what's going on for sort of the bottom quartile or bottom 2 quintiles, something like that, who are frankly, doing a fair bit worse than their parents or grandparents were doing in terms of ability to get into housing and affordability, etc. So that is likely to be a fairly major thing. What I would expect to see is you'll have kind of this new wave of stuff, and then on the backside of that, this kind of wealth inequality. Is it socialist? Like, how does it manifest? Is it maybe a little bit uncertain, but that group is probably going to become quite strong, and that will likely be the kind of reinvention of a bunch of these parties. So will they solve it? Probably not. But this is likely to be a political change that I would expect to see over the next while. And I would expect that to hit basically most of Europe, certainly Canada, certainly the US. You can kind of see on the US side of things, and maybe I'll do a video again talking a little bit about things from the standpoint of the Trump administration, et cetera. But it's likely, I think, that you probably see a period of kind of Republican success from like a political standpoint. What I mean is kind of getting elected. And you'll have to have some kind of reinvention of the Democratic Party. And the logical reinvention of the Democratic Party is to focus on this issue because it's just such an easy target. So we will see. Now, in terms of what's going on in Spain, what's going to happen there? I mean, first of all, it's not clear that they will pass this, okay? So it is proposed. However, it does need to go through Parliament, and they have a minority government, so they may not be able to get it through. If they do get it through, then I would expect to see a pretty major hit to housing prices as a result. I mean, it's basically a big rug pull on everybody who's bought over the last while, right? Because they're going to have far fewer buyers to come in. As I said, 15% is a pretty major share of the overall sales volume. So the rate of acceleration will probably reverse. It's just likely that that will happen. This, I would think, could put you in a situation where rental yields go up. The reason is a lot of people who were previously buying may want to rent now. Now, that does assume that these people aren't already taking the properties and just re-renting them. So there's that consideration that you have to keep in mind. But yeah, I would expect that there is a general decrease in the sales velocity because of this. And I think that in anticipation of it, you will probably see a bunch of people selling out of the properties that they bought over the last while, just because, like, do you want to get caught in front of that train? It doesn't seem super smart. So we shall see, but we can obviously just see the attention on housing. The housing stuff, and maybe I'll do a separate video on housing specifically talking about it because it's a complex issue. But as I said, there was this chronic underbuilding. There's this messed up bureaucracy. The truth is there's like a whole bunch of other stuff around, not just the bureaucracy, but you need labor, you need capital, you need all these different things to come together in order to add supply. This is not going to happen quickly. It is probably not that likely that you're going to get first principles analysis in terms of actually building housing that is low cost over time. You can subsidize it, obviously, but that's basically inflationary. And essentially that's a wealth transfer to people on the other side. And so not especially great unless it's given to some group that's going to essentially broaden the capital ownership base. So what I would foresee is that these problems will persist for some time. Maybe if the prices are not rising so much, you won't get as much political pressure because at least you have, people kind of get used to the temperature that they're in and therefore don't complain as much about it. But it's going to be an ongoing affordability problem across a lot of Europe, I would say, and Spain being a really big one. This in spite of the fact that Spain actually has pretty low housing prices compared to places like London, Paris, etc. So let me know what you guys think. Put it in the comments below. If you would like to get any assistance with anything, please reach out to us. As I said, you can book a call with me or you can visit offshorecitizen.net, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.